Unfortunately, Julia, we don't have too many more answers than we had when we first arrived on scene. We know that there are people still unaccounted for, and we know that they have found human remains of at least one person. Now, there have been some holdups in this investigation, one being the wind. That's the first thing you'll notice just by looking at me out here right now. That held up the investigation for a portion of the day yesterday. They really can't, Julia, and that's the thing. If it were to be on time, it would have had to be passed by midnight. However, that wasn't the case, despite what the governor is saying this morning. He sent us a release saying the budget had been passed hours before we saw it actually be passed. We were here around 3 o'clock this morning, and that's when we saw the assembly wrap up their voting session. So that's about 3 hours late. A massive fire on J Street in Schenectady. It is right across the street from City Hall. Dozens of people had to be relocated. They are in City Hall right now on this bitter cold morning, trying to keep warm. We do not know exactly how many people have been displaced, but we do understand that there were some businesses on the first floor of this building. One source also tells us that at least one person had to be brought to Westchester to be treated for burns.
In other news, the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal both reporting that Senate Majority Leader Dean Skelos will be arrested this week. Skelos and his 32-year-old son Adam have been the focus of a federal corruption investigation, and we could learn the specific charges as soon as tomorrow. The Wall Street Journal says the charges include extortion and conspiracy. This comes just 3 months after the former Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver was arrested on corruption charges and was forced to step down.
And traffic is really starting to back up now here in this half hour, and that's because state police are here on the scene, and they are stopping every single car that drives past the scene of the home where a quadruple homicide is being investigated this morning. We are not exactly sure at this point why they are stopping every single car and questioning the drivers, whether they've seen anything suspicious or if they know anything. Police are remaining tight-lipped until we're about to receive new information later on this morning when they will be addressing the media. But I want to show you the backup here along Western Avenue. Take a look at that line of cars. I'm going to have my photographer show you right now exactly what we're looking at in terms of damages. These trees are huge, and they were completely uprooted. So regardless of whether or not this was a tornado, it is very clear that there had to have been some very powerful winds in order to cause this amount of damage.
Well, it may feel like the snow and chilly temperatures have been around for about a month or so already, but today is the first official day of winter. It's the shortest, darkest day of the entire year. And with more on this chilly first morning of winter, we'll head on over to Nick.
40 minutes ago, our cameras were here as these two black vans showed up at the house. We are unsure exactly what they are doing at this point, but we do know that we've seen investigators go in and out of the home wearing white protective gear. We've seen all morning long them carrying evidence, what appears to be evidence from outside the home. Now, one thing I would like my photographer to show you is this one thing of flowers sitting by the tree there. That belonged to the family members that did stop by earlier on this morning about 2 hours ago. A heart-wrenching scene. 4 family members showed up bringing flowers and asking to enter the home. They were denied access but were visibly upset, sobbing.
Now, Lynn Falsetti has been on the scene all morning long, and she's going to be joining us live now with more on what's going on there. Lynn?
Good morning, Julia. Well, it looks like crews have pretty much left the scene right now. We have one National Grid truck there working to remove the power lines going into the home. Now, I did speak briefly with the family. While they didn't want to go on camera, they did tell me a little bit about the man who did live inside. They say that he's lived there for 47 years, is a survivor of pancreatic cancer, and just lost his wife in November. Kenneth White, the 5-year-old Knox boy who was murdered just days before Christmas. Brenda's daughter, Tiffany, is the one charged in his murder, and the county claims that Brenda knowingly placed Kenneth and his 2 sisters in her care, knowing that she suffered from an untreated mental illness. I'll have much more on this case coming up later on in the newscast, but for now we are live in Albany. Lynn Falsetti, CBS 6 News. And is it safe for business? What's next for the Glens Falls Civic Center after part of the building comes crashing to the ground? And was the budget passed in time? The governor saying yes, but we were here to see lawmakers work several hours past the deadline. How lawmakers are reacting, coming up. It's now sinking in for the dozens of people displaced by Friday's J Street fire that everything they own is now gone.
I can't believe I went over there and looked at the building. I just can't believe I got out of there.
Anthony Cortese narrowly escaped with his life from his 5th-story apartment. The Red Cross set up a shelter here at Christ Church on State Street. They now expect to be open until Monday, and many volunteers working 12-hour shifts, including Dara Young, who came from Greene County. She says the fact the shelter will be open through the weekend shows just how dire this situation is.
No way, no. 24 hours is the average. Like if we have an ice storm, that's usually resolved, and then we get the people situated. But this I knew was going to be big.
Tensions were high, and police investigators back again for day 2, looking for answers as to exactly what happened here. Those who survived this blaze are sticking to their story, saying no fire alarms went off.
Oh my God, the whole place is in blaze, and there's smoke going all the way up from the 3rd floor to the 4th floor, and it was burning on the 4th floor. None of their alarms went off. They're very sad. They've lost pets, they've lost people. You know, they just wiped out, and I've lost all my belongings and everything. I have to start all over again. I had thousands of dollars of belongings. I have to start all over again.
Meanwhile, the outpouring of support from the community has been overwhelming. Saturday, many stopped by the shelter trying to drop off clothing and food, but most of it had to be turned away.
These people came out with not even shoes. They had nothing. And starting all over. What would I do? How would I react? What would I do? It's just overwhelming. And
the American Red Cross is asking anyone that has any donations to instead bring them to the Salvation Army. They say they cannot accept donations unless they are unused and in packaging. If you have any questions or would like to know how you can donate, you can visit their website. We have a link to theirs on ours at cbs6albany.com. In Schenectady, Lynn Falsetti, CBS 6 News. Joseph Allen says all he needs is hard work, a snowblower, and a big heart. He single-handedly decided he was going to help those who are disabled, elderly, and low-income survive this brutal winter. He calls his mission Operation LED. For Dorothy Ingram and her husband, it was the beacon of hope they so desperately needed.
He was an answer to prayer.
Dorothy takes care of her husband, George, who is recovering from a stroke and remains on oxygen. The two have dedicated their lives to helping others and volunteering in their community. Their Gansevoort home was totally buried in snow, and neither one of them had the resources or strength to clear it out.
We had icicles that went all the way down to the ground, and it was just, and what's on the roof was backing up into the house, and I just got overwhelmed.
Roofs don't leak, and stuff like that, especially the ice buildup, it could give away any time, and, somebody can come out and get hit side of the head with ice, so it is dangerous.
Operation LED has only been around for almost 4 weeks, but Joe tells us he's already helped 300 people. He says each and every day he helps 20 to 30 homes just like this. Joseph Allen has been working hard clearing out homes from Plattsburgh to Albany. He was first inspired when a good friend and business partner gave him the gift to help others.
He gave me a snowblower, and then 3 weeks ago he passed away.
Then he learned he had a child on the way that would be born with a disability. He then decided to dedicate his time to helping those also facing adversity.
I had a lot of smiles, I had a lot of tears, but joy, that, people believe that I can't do this for free,
He says he'll continue to donate his time and hard work as long as there's still a need, with more and more people reaching out to him every day, giving people hope in this long winter, one roof at a time. In Gansevoort, Lynn Falsetti, CBS 6 News. It's been over 48 hours and still no answers as to what started this fire on J Street that displaced more than 50 people. Also no answers for families still looking for their loved ones. The building is too unsound for investigators to safely gather evidence. Sunday, crews began removing dangerous sections, taking aerial photos with these bucket trucks. Meanwhile, people looked on, still horrified by what happened here. One family that did not want to speak on camera still waiting to hear from their cousin. They say they haven't heard from her since the fire and believe she is no longer alive.
I have to sit there and go back, and try to track everyone down, make sure that everybody's accounted for, determine, hey, did you know who was staying in this apartment? Just verifying all the records that we have, as well as looking for other potential leads.
One of the biggest challenges for investigators is determining exactly who was living in the buildings at the time, who was just staying there, and who was subletting. They say the records are not very clear of that. What they're doing during the demolition is going through piece by piece, gathering evidence, and potentially locating those that are missing. Schenectady police are hoping that once the building is secure, they can determine if there are any bodies inside. Also, where the fire started and how. They tell us they are looking into reports that there were no working fire alarms and claims that someone had shut them off.
The apartment was beautiful, but everything leading up to it looked like it hadn't been taken care of very well for a while. I never heard any alarms going off in my building.
Ben Seville watched his crews work to secure the building.
I'm looking for my roommate's cat, who we were unable to grab on the way out.
He had just moved into a 4th-floor apartment in 102 J Street the day before the fire, and now has lost everything.
I'm stunned, thinking the whole time, what if I had just waited one more day,
In Schenectady, Lynn Falsetti, CBS 6 News.
You drive through the neighborhood sometimes on a warm night and you can just sense the tension in the air.
Over the past few years, John Cooney has seen gang tension brewing between two cities in the capital region. And it's being fueled by violence and now social media.
In the last decade or so, the whole face of the gang presence have changed. What we now have is younger groups, children, really, getting together and just taking out all the personal beefs that used to be settled in the schoolyard to a whole new level.
Captain John Cooney, former spokesperson for the Troy Police Department, says it's less organized crime like the Bloods and the Latin King gangs, meaning no rules. These groups call themselves the Goon Squad and the Young Guns, and they are fighting back and forth between Albany and Troy. And since Cooney has retired from the force, he's able to speak freely about the battle.
We've seen individuals, we have a guy from Troy who's got a beef with somebody from Albany. He goes over to Albany to take care of it. We've seen that act out, but what we see more and more now is if there is that beef, it's not just individual versus individual. It's I'll get my crew and we're going to find his crew. And next thing you know, we've got multiple suspects involved.
The feud between the two cities was fueled several years ago when Shaquem Miller was gunned down in South Troy. He was a well-known DJ and had a big following in the Collar City.
That took to a fight, that took to retribution back in Albany, and then Albany came back to Troy with a gun, and Shaquem was, in fact, executed, so to speak, on a city street. And that's when we really saw the flavor of this Albany versus Troy issue begin.
And the violence has since spread to innocent bystanders. Just last year, 5 people were shot outside Gino's Pizza in Troy. Police say only some of those shot were targeted. Others simply caught in the crossfire. Despite this, Troy police say the gang problem is fixed and haven't seen it flare up in months.
We reached out to the Albany Police Department about the war between Albany and Troy gangs, but they refused our request, saying the city of Albany doesn't even have a problem with gangs. But what we're hearing on the streets is telling a different story.
I've spoken with Albany police, I've spoken with Troy police, and both of them have said that neither city has a gang problem. Do you think there's any truth to that, or do you think that they're not telling the whole story?
They don't want you to know. It's a gang problem everywhere. It's not just Albany and Troy.
Zaquan Irby knows all too well the violence is real. His cousin Darze Reed, a Troy rapper, was killed while performing a show in Albany in 2013. He says the whole street culture needs to change.
We need these kids to have some kind of community center or youth development center. These kids have nothing to do. Idle hands turns into violent hands.
Irby now runs an athletic program for inner city kids, hoping to be the positive influence he says these kids so desperately need. According to former police captain John Cooney, an intimidation factor is preventing those who know when violence is going to happen from speaking out.
With multiple suspects, we've got a great higher level of intimidation on the streets towards witnesses. A great more bit of reluctance for witnesses to come forward. That's probably the biggest handicap we have in actually solving these, maybe even preventing these, because the word's usually out on the street that it's going to happen.
But to get killed, you know, yeah, I'm fearful of that because I can walk outside right now and get shot.
Lynn Falsetti, CBS 6 News.